are in a series called Didn't See It Coming, and today we are at part 3 of the series, where we are looking at the five challenges that nobody expects to be challenged with, and yet everyone experiences. 2 weeks ago, we talked about cynicism, how cynicism is formed, what causes it, the dangers of it, and our way out of cynicism. And last week, we talked about disconnection. And with roughly half of the American population feeling disconnected, feeling isolated, disconnection is likely something that you wrestle with, or at least it's likely something that you will wrestle with. And today, we're talking about a challenge that, to be honest, probably doesn't seem like an issue you have. Or if it does, it probably doesn't seem like that big of an issue, like a minor issue. And when you hear what we're going to talk about, I have a hunch that some of you may be thinking, you know what, I know who needs to hear this. I hope they're here. I hope they're listening in, because this is for them. This is a message that they need to hear. And I want to encourage you to not do that. I want to encourage you and challenge you not to do that, because the challenge that we are talking about today is not about somebody else's issue. It is an issue that we all have, and it's the challenge of pride. Now, when I was preparing for today, earlier this week, I thought, you know what, this is going to be a walk in the park. This is going to be easy to talk about pride. I mean, there's so much written on it in Scripture. There's so much literature that is out there about humility and pride, and not to mention that pride was just not something that I wrestle with. It's not something that I struggle with. And then I started to study pride. And it was weird, because I felt this impulse to not be introspective on the subject. I felt this resistance inside of me rising up to not look deep in my own life on pride, to not let pride apply to myself personally. And I felt this resistance, and it was the craziest thing. What I wanted to do is I wanted to make pride, make it somehow memorable, and humility, and yet dull it down for me personally. And I thought, why do I feel that resistance? Why do I feel so hesitant to look inward to see where pride is at in my life? And then it hit me. That's pride. Pride is keeping me from studying pride. And I thought, holy smokes, I struggle with pride. Now, I say that to say that just because you may not think pride is an issue for you, that just because you may think that pride isn't as big of an issue for you, that maybe you don't have pride or wrestle with pride, I want to encourage you to not be like me. To not be like me and dismiss it, to write it off, because pride is not just an issue. Pride is the underlying issue, I promise, to every other issue in your life. And so give me a few moments to kind of explain that, explain the dangers of pride and what we can do about that, okay? Today we hold people up in high honor, with high esteem, people who are honorable, people who are kind, people who are peacekeeping, those who are genuine, humble, people who are servants, not people who thrust themselves into situations to get things done, but people who are humble, quiet, kind, nice. And we rank as one of the highest virtues to have things like forgiveness, things like sacrificial love. And in the ancient world, in the non-believing ancient world, things could not have been any more different. The things that we see as virtues, the ancient world would have looked at us and thought, you are weak. Those are vices. For them, your dignity, your honor, your value, it largely depended upon your rank in society. So if there was a high-ranking individual, like, say, a king, an emperor, it was honorable to expect people to call you the great. It was honorable to be called the great. It was even honorable to be seen as a king, as somebody very high up, and having that kind of status, as being somewhat or semi-divine. It was an honorable thing for having those who were underneath of you worshiping you. To have statues of you formed in the center of the city, and then having people come to the temple where they would worship you and offer animal sacrifices to you, to hold festivals around you. That was an honorable thing, and to imagine someone as high as a king to serve somebody on the low end of the spectrum, to serve the poor, for instance, there could not have been anything more dishonorable. And while nobody has ever applauded the bold arrogance of somebody who gloats over others, there was a certain level of understanding of how you conducted yourself in a society like that, that today, if we were to look at that, we would think, man, they're so prideful. They're so prideful. But that was what was expected. That was a virtue. It was honorable. It was appropriate. It was a reasonable thing to do. It was just kind of the air they breathed. But here's the thing. Rarely do prideful people see pride in themselves. And the irony is that the more you have of pride, the more you see it in others. And it took Jesus showing up in that time in the ancient world to expose the pride in people and model a humble life for people to get it, for people to see it, for people to see a new way of living. You see, pride is not just an issue for the people of the past. It's not just an issue for the people that you know. It is your issue. Pride is our issue. And pride blinds us to its very presence. Pride blinds us to how destructive it really is. And pride is one of the things that the more you have it, the more you see it in other people. But our pride blinds us to that reality. And the most obvious sign that you have a pride issue and that you're blind to it is when we think that we aren't prideful, or that pride is not that big of a deal for me. So what's pride? What's pride? There's all kinds of definitions to pin down what pride is, but pride kind of boils down to this. Pride is an obsession with self. It's an obsession with self. It is recentering, it is reordering the universe around me, around ourselves, that the world exists for me. The world exists to meet my needs, to fulfill my desires, to fulfill my dreams, my expectation. It's a world in which we create it around ourselves. And it's often been noted by Christians throughout the centuries that pride was the original sin in the very beginning. Here's how Satan tempted Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The bait on the end of the hook for Adam and Eve, it was not a desire to sin. It was not a desire to be disobedient to what God had said. Rather, the bait on the other side of the hook, the bait on the hook that really got Adam and Eve to be intrigued by what Satan had to say, was the thought that they could have a world centered around them. They can have a world that revolved around them, where they could be at the center of it, and everything could be about them, where they could be like God. And that's pride. Pride is the original problem. It's the original problem. This was the problem for Adam and Eve, and it was also the problem for Satan. Satan tempted Adam and Eve for the very same thing that corrupted him. And in a dual fashion, the prophet Isaiah, he describes the corruption of a king, but he does so in a very unique way. He kind of parallels this to Satan and Satan's downfall, Satan's corruption. And here's what he says in Isaiah 14, verse 14. It says, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Pride is the original issue for man and for angels. Pride is the original issue that has corrupted all of creation. And pride is still the original issue. Pride is the root problem. It's the mother of sins. C.S. Lewis calls it the great sin. In his book, Mere Christianity, he has a chapter that is dealing specifically with pride. And one of the things that is just, I love his comparison here. He says, when you compare the sin of pride to everything else, to every other sin appears as a mere flea bite. A mere flea bite to the sin of pride. Timothy Keller, he calls pride, he describes pride in this way. He says, pride is the carbon monoxide of sin. It silently and slowly kills you without you even knowing it. And once you begin to dissect pride, once you begin to dissect the issues in your life, the issue behind the issue, the sin behind the sin, you discover very quickly that pride is behind it all. What is it that keeps people who are harboring anger towards somebody else? What is it that keeps people harboring unforgiveness or who are consumed with greed or drunkenness or sexual sin? It's pride. Pride. It's the desire to recreate our world where we occupy the center of it. And here's why this is dangerous. Because pride is the antithesis. It is the antithesis of a godly mindset. Pride is an anti-God mindset. The desire to make any part of our world, even the littlest part about us, means that we have to remove anything that threatens us to occupy that place. Anything that threatens us being at the center has to be removed so that we can be the most important. Pride demands us that we remove whatever is superior to us, even if that being is God himself. And that is dangerous. And here's the danger of this. That when we let pride go untreated, it is like a spiritual cancer that grows in our life until it has infiltrated everything and killed everything in our life. And then it begins to make you unreasonably competitive. Pride makes us feel superior to everything else, superior to everyone else. So take money, for example. Let's say that you want to get an honest wage. You want to get paid honestly for life, but you want to have a little bit extra to live off of, right? To enjoy life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what pride does is pride comes in and it hijacks that desire. Instead of just having a little bit of money, instead of having enough money to live off of and to enjoy life, what pride says is, you want to have a little bit more than your coworker. You want to be paid a little bit more than somebody else. You want to be recognized to be the person who is the hardest worker in your company. You want to be seen as the most dependable person, the most successful worker over and above other people. And you can apply that same principle to things like intelligence, to beauty, to health, exercise. I mean, you name it, and pride can take over that desire. Pride makes us feel superior to everyone, to someone. The next thing that it happens to us is it begins to make us feel judgmental. Everyone that does not live up to how we live, to our standards, to our expectations, to how we think, to how we function in life, we begin to look down on them. And very quickly, we become judgmental of everybody who is not me. And because no one really measures up to me, and since you have a desire to maintain a superior self, a kind of superiority, we become unaccountable to anyone because we don't want anyone to know the real issues going on. We want to preserve a certain image before others, and we want to appear superior. And so anything that threatens that status, even if it is being accountable, we remove it. And what happens is we very quickly become isolated. It isolates us. It isolates us until something in us or around us breaks. Something snaps. And we find ourselves hitting rock bottom because we did not let go of pride, and pride got the best of us. It's not a coincidence that God says this about pride. Proverbs 16. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. For most people, we are blinded to that reality. We are blinded to the destructive nature of pride until we have hit rock bottom. The reality is we didn't see pride coming. So what are the warning signs? What can we look out for to kind of steer clear of pride in our life? Here's 6 warning signs to look out for when it comes to pride. First is when you begin to compare yourself to others. When you begin to compare yourself to others. You may look at the problems that other people are wrestling with and think, well, I'm not as bad as them. Right? I don't have as bad of problems as they do. Well, my kids, they're not as dysfunctional as their kids. We may even think, you know what, my marriage is not as bad as their marriage. And so we begin to compare. Or you may compare yourself to others and either have the motivation to be better than them or even to deepen self-pity. That because I'm not where they are, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and show them up. I'm going to surpass them. Or maybe you think, you know, because I did not get a life like they did, my life's not going to amount to much. Another sign of pride is being deeply bothered by pride in others. Being deeply bothered by pride in others. Sounds kind of odd, but it's true. Oftentimes, the reason that we can so easily spot pride in other people is because we have learned to recognize what pride looks like inside of ourselves. The more you have of pride, the more you see it in others. And that doesn't mean that only prideful people can spot pride in other people. God sees pride all the time, right? And God's not prideful. God's not proud, and yet He sees it all around. And so there is a way to identify pride in a pure motivation and a godly motivation, and it all has to do with our response, our internal response when we encounter pride. That when we see pride in others, what is our response? Do we feel threatened by their pride, or do we feel grieved by their pride? That when we see pride in others, are we annoyed? Are we annoyed with them? Are we frustrated at their pride? Are we jealous of it, or are we heartbroken? Are we torn up? Are we grieved? Because we know how damaging pride is. If we feel threatened in the least, it is a sign of our own pride. Another warning sign is when your self-worth is determined by your performance. Some feel like they won't amount to much unless they have contributed to something, unless they have accomplished something, where they have become successful, they have earned the approval of someone, their spouse, their kids, their parents. And they feel like until they have gotten to that place, unless they have performed well, that they are under par, that they are less valuable, less significant, they are expendable, they are worthless. Another sign of pride is when you struggle celebrating others' successes. That when somebody does a better job than you, do you criticize that? Do you explain away why they did a better job than you? You know, I just didn't have enough time. I felt rushed. I have kids running around the house. I just didn't have the time to give to that. And you begin to explain away, begin to rationalize all of these other things of why somebody else did a better job than you. And the bottom line is that we struggle to celebrate others for their achievements because inwardly we want to be recognized for ours. Another sign of pride is when you begin to push away others who threaten your image. Maybe it's somebody who is more successful than you. Maybe it's somebody who has more money in the bank, or maybe it's somebody who outwardly is prettier than you, or has a better maybe character than you, or a better handle on your issues, or smarter, whatever it is. If they appear in any way better than you, you push them out. You distance yourselves, because it means that when they are around, you are less impressive. And lastly, you always have an opinion about everything. Or at least you want others to know or think that you know what you're talking about. You don't want to appear ignorant. You don't want to appear unintelligent. You don't want to appear dumb. You want to say in everything. It is this desire really to be an expert on everything. And can I be 100% honest with you? That as a Christian, can I be transparent with you? In each of these 6, I see a motivation in me. In each of these 6, I see a little bit of pride at work, and there is so much inside of me that wants to dismiss that. There's so much inside of me that wants to quickly move past it, the talk about pride in a very generic way, and then move past on what you can do to live a humble life, and to not look at the pride in my own life. And of all of the 6, the one that hurts the most for me to admit is this last one. This is the most painful one. And I've walked around all week with a pit in my stomach as I have looked at my own soul. And I realized that, sometimes I think I just want other people to think I know what I'm talking about when I don't. Sometimes I just have the motivation of I want to be an expert on a subject, and I want you to think that. And that's wrong. That's wrong. That is unbelievably prideful. And I've walked around with a pit in my stomach because I thought, man, I don't wrestle with pride. Pride's not my issue. And God says, let me show you, Skyler. It is. And it is absolutely humiliating to be that vulnerable with you. Everything in me wants to sugarcoat that, quickly move past that, right? Everything in me just wants to move past that and pretend like this isn't something that I wrestle with, this isn't something that I struggle with. But I don't want pride to win in my life. I don't want pride to have control of my life, and I would rather be humiliated before everyone than justifying my own sinfulness to try to impress someone, even if that's you. I don't want pride to win. I'm about halfway through my schooling, and each semester I take one class, and what that means is once a month I travel up to Lincoln, and I have an all-day class with my professor and the other students. And every time I go up to class, I think, I'm smart, I'm fairly intelligent, I know what this class is about, I know the things that we are going to talk about, I have a good handle on these issues, I have an opinion on this. And very quickly, as I interact with the teacher, and as I interact with the students, I have this realization come over me where I go, wow, I actually don't know what I'm talking about. I'm dumb. I'm going to go ahead and just keep quiet and let the class go on, because I realized that I was very arrogant walking into this class. And school has been very humbling for me as I realized how much I don't know. That's me. That's me if I'm being honest with you, if I'm being transparent with you. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you wrestle with. I don't know where you are at with your fight against pride. But I hope more than anything that it doesn't take you out because you didn't see it there. That it doesn't take you out because you didn't see it coming. Jeremiah, he tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things. And if there's one thing that most people are deceived on, that our hearts have deceived us on, is the issue of pride, of not thinking that we struggle with it. So what can we do? What can we do about pride? What's the answer? Well, the answer is in humility. Humility is the answer. We have unfortunately inherited pride from Adam and Eve. Thank you guys for that, right? We've unfortunately inherited that, but God, through His Word, He has given us wisdom with how we can live a humble life. And here's the key idea, and I love this so much from Carrie's book that I decided just to make this the key point this morning. Only humility can get you out of what pride got you into. It is only humility that whatever pride has gotten you into, whatever bind it has got you into, whatever corner you have backed yourself into, it is only humility that can get you out of that. The way forward is humility. It is us humbling ourselves. Adding fire to fire does not make any situation better. In fact, it just creates an inferno. That when we feel our pride is attacked, the worst thing in the world to do is respond in pride. It makes everything worse. And really, we only have two options when it comes to pride. We can either be humbled or we can humble ourselves. We can either be humbled or humble ourselves. Those are the only choices that we have. There is always going to be somebody bigger than you, somebody richer than you, somebody healthier than you, somebody who is more fit, who is faster, smarter than you, and at some point you will meet them. At some point, life will happen to you and you will feel humbled. And even if none of those things happen to you, there will come a point with every single one of us where we will stand before the God in which all of creation actually does revolve around, and we will have to stand and give an account for why we took His honor. Let this truth sink into your heart. James, who is Jesus' half-brother, he knew a thing or two about humility. For instance, James, Jesus' half-brother, he went from one who openly and publicly scolded his brother for the things that he was teaching, and then he shifted his position after Jesus rose from the dead to believing that his brother is God incarnate, God in the flesh. And here's what he says, James chapter 4. But he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says that God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. James tells us that it's not just that God is frustrated with pride, it's that God actively opposes the proud. That God actively opposes the proud. That if we choose to be prideful in life, God will see to it that we get a healthy dose of reality in our lives. And so what should we do? Well, we need to humble ourselves. What happens when we humble ourselves is that God, not anyone else, not our jobs, not our reputation, when we humble ourselves, God lifts us up. God lifts us up. God honors those who are humble. And there really is only two options. We can choose to humble ourselves, trusting that God will lift us up, or we can lift up ourselves, trusting that God will humble us at some point. And I can't make that decision for any one of you, but I can sure tell you that I would rather willingly humble myself before God than let God humble me. Because I imagine those are going to be totally different. And so how does that work? How do we live a humble life? What even is humility? Well, the reason that humility works, it's not because it makes sense. It's not because it's logical. It's not because, that's just the ethical way to live. It's not because that's what everybody else is doing. The reason humility works is because Jesus made it work. Jesus trailblazed a new path forward, and he showed us how it works. And here's what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. In your life, be driven to not build life around you, around me, around us. Rather, build your life around serving others. He says, rather in humility, value others above yourself. And that is what humility is about. That is what humility is about. Humility is not so much about you. It's not so much about us. It's about others. Now, somebody has once said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. That humility is not having a lower self-image, but it is just thinking less often about yourself. And I like that, and that's true, but the problem is it's still about you, right? I mean, it's thinking less about yourself, and that's not what humility is about. Humility is about valuing others above ourselves. Humility is about the other person. It is about valuing them above how much we value ourselves. To further describe this, Paul tells us a little bit more on what that actually looks like and why we should actually live a humble life. Here's what he says, verse 4. Not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. That when we are looking out for our own interest, what begins to happen is we find that people hurt us. We find that we are hurt and that we hurt others. We find needs that go unmet when we are looking out for ourselves because we are functioning out of pride. But when we check pride at the door and we are focusing on other people, we find that there is no needs that go unmet because we are not focused on ourselves. We are focused on valuing other people. Why should we do that? Here's why, verse 5. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God. Jesus was not just a good man. Jesus was not just a prophet. Jesus was not a moral, incredible teacher. Jesus was God in the flesh. Jesus was God who has come down to earth, 100% God and 100% man. Jesus is God who has come down, and he says this, who did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. Verse 10. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Humility works because Jesus made it work. Humility isn't a good thing to do because it makes sense at home, at your job, wherever. Humility works because Jesus made it work, and Jesus called us to that kind of lifestyle. Three big ways that Jesus modeled humility is when he came from heaven, think about this, right? In heaven, all of the angels, everything knows who God is. They know all of this, and they worship God, and he left that to come to earth, to a place that would reject him, that would disown him. And Jesus took on human form on earth in a place that would not recognize him, that would not honor him for who he was. And then Jesus died on a cross, humiliated before everyone. And as a result of his humility, God lifted him up. God resurrected him. Jesus ascended back to heaven, and he was given the title of Lord over all. Humility, honor follows humility. Honor follows humility, and disgrace follows pride. We see this true within the life of Jesus. We see this true within the early Christian's life, and we see it true with us. That honor follows humility every time. So how can we be humble? Well, Paul gives us some important ways for us to be humble. So let me just give you or highlight 5 habits of a humble life. The first is never lose your gratitude. Never lose your gratitude. There is so much for us to be thankful for us to be grateful for in life. And very often when somebody who is proud, somebody who is prideful, they don't look at the things that they are grateful for. A lot of times they look at the things that they don't have and are ungrateful for their life. And we should never lose our gratefulness, our gratitude. And above all of the small things, the gospel tells us that Jesus, he had to die for us because our sin really was that bad. That our sin was really that bad that it cost the Son of God his own life. That Jesus came and he died for us, not because we were worthy of it, but because we weren't worthy of it at all. And Jesus had to do that. And as a result, we are worthy because he has made us worthy, not because we are. And as a result, we can be grateful that the price was paid in full. Second, take the low place. Just as Jesus chose to become human, a slave of humanity, so you take the low place. Don't seek approval, don't seek praise, don't seek a desire to be noticed. Instead, do great things, do big things, and don't seek to be noticed. Do small things, do tiny things like serving or picking up trash or doing something tiny like that, and don't hope for others to see that. Don't hope for others to know that or to honor you for that, but trust that what God sees you do in secret, he will reward. Third, be around honest people. If the only people that we have in our life are the people who like us, are the people who tell us how great we are, the people who will just sing our praises, we will struggle to live a humble life. We need people in our life who will tell us the cold, hard truth about our life. We need people in our life who will help us be humble, who will be honest with us and speak truth to us. Which, just as an aside, is a huge benefit to being a part of a life group, a Bible study, because you have surrounded yourself with people who may not praise everything that we do, but who may just tell you the honest truth about our lives. It helps us stay accountable. Fourth, put others into the spotlight. It might be hard to not be noticed for something that you've done continually. It might be hard to not want others to see what you have done or achieved. But find joy in watching other people succeed. Find joy in pushing other people into the spotlight before other people. Give other people the credit. And let your desire to be noticed come from God noticing your humility in those moments. And lastly, be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself and be honest with God. If we do all of these things, but we do not come face to face with reality. If we do all of these things, we have all of this in place, but we do not come face to face with what is inside of our own soul, what is inside of our own heart, with our own pride, then we fool ourselves. Lead honest lives. Confess your pride to God. Confess this, and then go find somebody and then tell them, man, this is what I struggle with. Like when he said point number 3 when it comes to diagnosing pride, that's me. I wrestle with this. I struggle with this. Be honest with yourself and be honest with God. And when we are honest with ourselves, and what we wrestle with what we struggle with, we can then find a way forward. We can then find a pathway out of it with God's help. It's kind of like what G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle, right? that when we know our own shortcomings, when we know our own pride, our own pitfalls, we are able, through God's help, through God's word, through God's Spirit working in our lives, to be humble. And that's the solution. The solution is humility. Because only humility will get you out of what pride has gotten you into. And it is only humility that in the end God actually honors, that God lifts up. And so please don't leave here today angered. Don't leave here today flustered, frustrated. Don't leave here today embarrassed or humiliated or having kind of a shot at your own ego, or maybe we should have a shot at our pride taken, but leave here humble. Leave here humbled. Leave here to saying, you know what? Before I came in here today, I didn't think pride was an issue for me. But now I see it. And I'm going to do something about it. Because here's the deal. Something in us will break. Something in us will give. And it will either be you or it will be pride. And I can promise you that there is something far, far, far better in store on the other side of humility than there is on the other side of pride. And I can promise you that you would rather have the reward for being a humble person than being a proud person.